that the NWSL's players, 300 plus players, aren't just national team players. What makes our league great is all of our players being able to be in a position to be successful. And so it's our job to really strike that balance and make the best of what can be a disruptive situation. And I have no doubt that we'll be able to capitalize on it as the players come home.
We'll take one more from Evan in the room, and then I'm going to shift to some Zoom questions.
Evan Williams from Sportico. Going back to media rights for a second, a lot of the recent deals we've seen in other leagues have broken out into kind of two camps. There's streaming services that have a lot of money and smaller reach, and there's legacy broadcasters that have less money, more reach. I know you want both, but walk us through how you're thinking about kind of balancing those two things in the stocks.
Yeah, I would add a third one to your list in terms of lenses through which we think about sort of deal construct, and that's term. Term, reach, and dollars are the three sort of primary drivers behind a media deal. And oftentimes, I would argue, even if whether you're an emergent property or an established league, oftentimes those things are in tension with one another. Until we learn and understand what the opportunities are and what the trade-offs, more importantly, might be between those things, we have not yet made a decision about what's the primary driver, because it'll depend on the market. And the market will tell us whether and how we should balance those three and oftentimes competing initiatives. The exponential growth the league has had in such a short period of time really creates a situation that's both exciting but also unknown. And the market tension that we know exists and the interest in the league, I think, will help position us best to be able to optimize the opportunity.
All right, we're going to go to some on Zoom. They're on all different topics, but we're going to go down the road, so it's easier for me to manage and make sure I get them all. Any update on announcing a location for the 2023 championship, since the date is out there?
We'll be launching an RFP, actually, to our teams. I talked earlier about process. I really do believe in process. I think it will bring us to the best possible result. So we expect in the coming weeks to send out a request for proposal from all of our teams to determine who's interested in hosting and what the opportunity might be. And so hopefully we'll have an update on that in the coming weeks. I'd like to think before our start of the season. And it's definitely a top priority as we come out of the draft.
This one's from Tyler Griever in Louisville. In regards to corrective action for Racing Louisville, Christy Holly is the only named individual, but the league is requiring a separate sporting staff from Louisville City FC. After reviewing the Yates and joint investigations, as well as any other relevant materials, what went into the decision to require that, but not name or discipline any members of Louisville's administration or ownership?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think the first and most important point is that individual sanctions were really driven by Section 5 of the report. The joint investigative team, which again was agreed upon and deployed on behalf of both us and the Players Association, was very intentional about who they named in Section 5 and directed us to follow Section 5 of the report in the context of corrective action. And the people we named on Monday in our corrective action statement were specifically tied to those individuals. As it relates to the decision to mandate that Louisville and North Carolina separately staff their NWSL team, it really comes down to a strong belief that it's important for all of our teams, but those are the only two teams that have shared resources, particularly on the sporting side, where player environment, player concerns, player culture is so important, particularly as we forge a new path, that those teams have dedicated resources on the sporting side. People whose job it is every single day only pay attention to the NWSL team to stay in touch with the players, the player reps, the coaches, and focus on it full time.
Thanks. We'll stay on the Racing Louisville front. They announced that they were hiring a GM in October. Do you have a time when you would like to see a GM in place for the club, given everything that was found in the joint investigation?
Yeah, I know actually they're actively interviewing candidates, and certainly I know it's their desire to identify the right candidate as soon as possible. That process actually began before our corrective action statement earlier this week, so they're pretty far along in the process, and I think specific updates would have to come from them about their timeline, but I have no doubt it's top priority for them.
And this one's from Theo Lloyd Hughes. What type of investment in anti-racist reform has the NWSL identified as part of its systemic reform? Is anti-racism investment being taken into account for expansion?
Yeah, anti-racism, I think, undoubtedly was a called out area in the joint investigative report as an area of focus from a systemic reform perspective. We actually have our first official meeting for our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force on Friday afternoon. Karina LeBlanc is the chair of that task force, and she, along with the Black Women's Players Collective, who I'm very fortunate has agreed to be part of that task force, as well as Ed Foster Simeon, who's the executive director of the United Soccer Foundation, are early named people on that task force. On our meeting on Friday, we're going to talk about any others we feel like we should engage, but racism clearly was a theme in the report. It was specifically called out in the report, and I believe it will be a priority for us moving forward to ensure that everyone feels like they can feel safe. I think the focus will be on education. We'll focus on policy reform. We'll focus on systemic issues that we know, again, are not unique to our league, and really try to tackle it head on as we are all of the other issues in the report.
Thank you. We will go from Alex Silverman. You mentioned beginning conversations with potential media partners next week. Does that mean the CBS's exclusive negotiating window has lapsed?
Yeah, their negotiating window has expired. And it was always the intention of both parties that we would discuss our mutual interest in continuing to work together, which has been achieved. We've both expressed a positive sentiment towards a future relationship, while also recognizing that we would need to have conversations with the broader marketplace. So that is the stage of the negotiation process that we are in, which is that we'll continue to work closely with and stay in touch with CBS while we have meetings with others in the space.
Thank you. Next, we'll go from Meg Linehan. Are there any plans or additional investment for production quality this season across broadcast and streaming?
Yeah, you might recall in July, we announced that we were implementing VAR. That effort is underway. I don't know how many of you have worked with other leagues that have implemented VAR, but it is a many-month process with a tremendous investment of resources, not just from a broadcast perspective, but training the VAR individuals themselves who are going to have to be watching every game, but also from a technology perspective, having confidence that we'll be positioned to be able to enact that initiative live, and everything is on track for that to occur. That investment also requires that we go to a minimum of 6 cameras for every game for next season. And that investment was approved by our board, and that will be effective for the start of our season, March 25th.
This one's from Andre Carlisle. Gianni Infantino recently spoke about a Club World Cup. I certainly want one, but I'm hesitant about FIFA managing it. What are your thoughts on the idea and potential of such tournament?
I think a lot of conversations to be had for sure. This sport is quite unique in the intersectionality and relationship between club and country. And I think there's a lot to be gained from us working together to ensure that both are set up for success. And I actually think we need each other to be successful in order to maximize our opportunities. So looking forward to having conversations with them. One of the reasons that I've made the effort in my first 8 months to go over to Europe and spend time in person with the international ecosystem is really a recognition that FIFA is interested in growing the women's game, and we want to be part of those discussions so that we can help inform how their decisions affect our league and make sure that we have a voice in what any consequences are from decisions that they make that could impact our business. Because from my early conversations with them, I genuinely believe that they want and need us to be successful, and they may not have full appreciation of what our day-to-day goals and opportunities and challenges are, and we'll make sure that we have a seat at the table in those discussions.
Before I kind of take a couple more, I'll go back to the room.
Jason Anderson, Pro Soccer Wire. I wanted to ask, you mentioned some of the league hires. One of them is you hired a director of strategy, Carlin Hudson, who used to play in the league. What exactly are you looking for short-term and long-term from that role? And was it important that a strategic director would come from an ex-player, be an ex-player in the case that he is?
Yeah, Carlin brings a unique background to her role. The fact that she's a former player is a plus, but not necessarily required for her job. Her primary qualifications for what she does is the fact that she has experience from a consulting firm. She spent 3 years at Bain and spent the 6 months before she joined us as an extern at US Soccer. Those are her primary qualifications for the role. Of course, with the work that she does, she brings forward a player-first lens to the strategic work that she's leading. And for that reason, made the decision to have her lead our systemic reform efforts, because it requires both strategic skill set as well as the fact that she was a player here. As we think about the future, I am proud to have hired the first former player, and I know it won't be the last former player we have hired. At the championship, I was contacted by some former players and some players who are nearing the end of their career to talk about future opportunities, both in the league and at teams. And it's one of the other litmus tests, I would say, that the players are really believing in the future of the league, that they want to continue to be part of it. And one of the investments that we're committed to is building out an alumni relations function. And part of the ancillary goals from that will be that we build a relationship and provide connectivity back to the league from former players. And we're actually intending to reach back to prior to the NWSL as well, because that really is all part of the NWSL story.
Henry Bushnell from Yahoo Sports. 2 questions ago, you spoke about working with FIFA and other international entities. Think specifically about the top European leagues, other top leagues in the world. Do you ever feel like you're competing with them commercially and trying to make sure that the NWSL, is both commercially and from a sporting perspective, is the preeminent top women's soccer league in the world? Or do you often feel like you're working kind of on the same team as them and working to grow women's soccer?
I think more the latter. And it's one of the things that each leader from those other leagues have remarked on. There's a trade association called the World Leagues Forum that has historically existed on the men's side and now for the first time exists on the women's side. And some of the leaders of that organization have shared their observation that the women's game is unique and that we all showed up at the first ever meeting in July around the Women's Euros intentionally with the effort and desire to collaborate and share best practices. I don't really view them as competition on the commercial side, particularly because we play in different seasons. But even if we didn't, I think this is an area where their success translates to success for us and vice versa. And the more competitive the global landscape is in the World Cup and otherwise, I think the more investment we'll see coming into the league and coming into the sport. I think the one place where we probably do compete is for player talent. And in that regard, I think it'll force everybody to raise the bar. And I think that's a good thing for the players. It's part of the reason why competition is important in business, because it forces everybody to make smart business decisions. And I think, again, the proof of concept here is that Davinia wanted to play in Kansas City because they built a dedicated training facility. And I think that will spur additional investment that will help us to raise the game and elevate the player experience that will provide fruits for the future for the success of the league. I think she had a question too.
Hi, it's Mara Griffin with Anscape. The first question is, when we look at players like Alyssa Thompson, I think it's safe to say that we might increasingly see players who are willing to forego college and immediately enter the NWSL, who are looking at the tremendous growth and possibility and also the very uncomfortable and necessary reckonings that are happening. So I'm wondering what message you might offer to those young players who are looking at this league, maybe with some trepidation and also excitement. And then I'm hoping that we can go back to one of the first things you said about the third step of systemic reform and how it needs to take a while. And sometimes that work is not always public. So I'm just curious how you're thinking about that when there's so much visibility onto the league and each of the steps that they're taking.
Yeah, two good questions. On the first one, I would say, particularly given this sport's propensity to attract younger talent, unlike some other sports where I've worked, where I think the entry age tends to be a little bit older, I think it places some responsibility on the league to ensure that we're investing in education to allow for those players to think about their future beyond playing. And of course, those programs do not currently exist in a robust way. And it is something that we will be focusing on as we think about the future. It's something that came up in collective bargaining. And I think the more we see modifications to our rules where players can come in younger and younger, I think the more responsibility it places on us as an organization to ensure that we're also providing these players with an opportunity to be educated and to think about their future. And some of that will come through the extensions of and the foundation of the alumni relations, but really a more robust education program around what life after sport means and mental health around retirement and all of the challenges that athletes face when they have to face down and have their moment of reckoning that the thing that has been their life's work and their dream is coming to an end and they have to really find a new identity. And I actually was proud to have led a lot of that work at the NHL. We launched the NHL's first ever education program for current players that offered them opportunities to continue to go back to school, to have internships, to have meet and greets. We leveraged our sponsors for that at the NHL, and we're already doing some of that at our league. Nationwide hosted a bunch of players this summer in an internship program, and I spoke to some of those players who were there and got feedback from our partner who, by all accounts, it was an incredible experience. And I think that's a great proof of concept for us to do more of that. And as the average age of the entry point in our league gets younger, I think we'll need to do more of that. Your second question about systemic reform, I've had a lot of conversations about this with Megan Burke because I think it's both a blessing and a curse that everything is so public because there's so many stakeholders who are holding us accountable and we embrace and accept that accountability. I do think for the players' benefit, it would be helpful for the trust to be built for us to do that hard work, because in order for the players to be able to confidently give feedback to us about what's working and what's not, they don't want to have to answer questions about this. We need to be able to provide a safe space for them to give feedback and input and make sure that everybody can put their hat back on of what their day job is. And it's our job to run the league. And it's incredible what's happened in the last year. Since I started on April 20th, we've doubled the size of our staff in 8 months. 7 of my 9 direct reports are new hires. So our entire senior leadership team, the board is investing in what's necessary. And what I keep hearing from the players and the Player Association is they want to focus on playing. They're athletes. They don't want to have to carry the burden of making sure that we're doing our jobs. And I think we're starting to turn the corner on players feeling confident that we are here to take this seriously. There are professionals who are in the appropriate seats to address the history and to make sure we get it right.
Steph, we'll do one more here and then just a few more on Zoom and then we'll wrap up.
Obviously the league has been dealing with some really critical issues the past year, but I think you mentioned that, you're coming up with a new brand strategy. There was an announcement in July 2021, which was like 10 years ago, about, rebranding. I think you had hired Berman to do that. So I'm just wondering, so again, 2022, really important stuff at the top of the list. Where are you in that process now? Is it resuming?
Yeah, I think the full brand work is a longer process and is underway. We're currently targeting 2024 as any potential changes to our logo or anything that we might consider for our full brand. What I think you'll see for 2023 is a new brand narrative, a new brand presence that is focused on the game, that is focused on our athletes, that is focused on the joy that this game brings to communities, and really use it as a moment to celebrate what is being achieved through the NWSL as a representation of what's possible in women's sports.
We'll do a couple more from Zoom. This one's from Morgan Acuff. Paul Riley has been saying he will fight his NWSL punishment. Is there any avenue for him to do so?
I can't really comment on hypotheticals. We certainly haven't been contacted directly by him. We stand by our decision that we issued earlier this week. I think it's not only supported by the Joint Investigative Report, but it's also supported by the Yates Report. So 3 different massive law firms have essentially reached the same conclusion, and we stand by our decision.
This one's from Bob Williams. What do you make of the new women's soccer league in Canada? And does this mean the NWSL won't be expanding to Canada if indeed it ever was?
So I think this is a similar response to the international conversation, which is the fact that there's interest in Canada in pro soccer. I view as a good thing. It'll raise the bar. It'll continue to drive viewership and attendance across our ecosystem, and we welcome more engagement in women's soccer globally. I think the World Cup will be a great opportunity. We all know there's some really incredible Canadian stars who play in our league, and we're focused on actually thinking about ways to engage the Canadian community around the players who are playing in the NWSL in the short term as we think about the Women's World Cup.
And this one, when you look back on your first year of being commissioner of the NWSL as April approaches, how would you describe your first term and what might you improve going forward?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I think how I think about the last year, really a dream come true, that I am in a position to apply my background on behalf of this league and to have achieved the kind of turnaround and transformation in such a short period of time, knowing there's still hard work ahead that I'm proud and excited to dive into, but seeing all of the reasons to be hopeful and inspired for the future. In terms of what I can improve on, in full self-reflection, time management, now that we have a senior leadership team in place to run the league and manage staff and all of those things, I look forward to spending time thinking about strategy and long-term goals and take myself out of the weeds so people can do the jobs they were hired to do and give me the space to really think big picture, which with everything going on in the last year, I would say I wish I had done more of and would look forward to doing more of as we move forward.
All right, 3 more quick ones. Circle back on this one quick. Steph and Meg say they're not coordinated on this, but Meg also asked about the rebrand, and I thought that she had texted Steph to ask for her. But Meg wants to know if, I know you said that rebrand more likely 2024, but would a championship trophy remodel be possible for 2023?
We can put it on the list, Meg. We'll get your input on it. No, I think how we show up for the players and the fans is everything. And that's certainly one of the manifestations of that. So we have discussed it. It is one of the many things on the list that we'll be looking at for this season.
From Jacob Christowell, with expansion on the horizon, is there a destination number of teams that the league would like to have? For example, the 30s we have with the U.S. men's sports leagues, or will it be based on health of the market interest?
Well, I think the demand is there for us to expand as quickly as we want to. I think it will be our self-discipline that tempers that enthusiasm to ensure that we're doing it sustainably and in a viable way. There isn't a set number currently. When I talk about having headspace to think about long-term planning, that's definitely one of the things that I want to spend some time thinking about so that we can set goals not on an annual basis, but on a 3, 5, and 10-year basis as well.
And we will end with this one from Jacob Serrano. Jacob, I think she's already answered your first part of your question on just reassuring players who'll be drafted tonight that the league has moved forward with the misconduct in the league. But on top of that, what are you most looking forward to tonight in regards to the draft?
Well, I said at the beginning, it's probably a good way to end as well, that the draft to me is the sign of hope. It's the sign of the future. Watching and seeing how families celebrate their hours and hours of commitment to their young kids to get to where they are. And I think of it now from the perspective of a parent, and not that my sons are going to be able to play professionally in any sport. But when I see them play at whatever level they achieve, I think of the hours I've spent and the early mornings and the late nights and running into the locker room with water bottles. And when I look at those parents looking at their kids, I just feel so grateful to be part of that moment with them. And that's what I'm most looking forward to. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Well, with that, we'll wrap up this press conference. Appreciate everyone joining us today, and we look forward to kicking off a new season tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.